It's a beautiful sunny day here in Bristol, and in this video we're going to be changing the water pump on this 2004 SL55 AMG. The water pump on this car isn't actually leaking, but when I changed the AC air conditioning pulley last week, I noticed that the bearing on the water pump is quite loose. It's a good idea on any car, let alone a supercharged AMG car, to fix things before they go wrong. So if you've been following this channel, you'll see that we've done a full transmission service on this car. We've done an oil change. We recently changed the ABC fluid, and today we're going to be changing at least one of the pulleys as well, once again as a preventative measure. And definitely putting a new water pump on here. Now, just arrived from America is a parcel from URO, and on the subject of preventative measures, what I've done is I've ordered a whole load of parts for this car that I know at some stage will need replacing. For example, the gear shifter has a plastic part in it which tends to break and will leave you stranded, and you'll notice that that's starting to go wrong if you experience difficulty getting into gears. And don't wait for that to break and get stuck in part, because it's really difficult to sort out once that happens. It's much better to actually replace that fragile plastic part with a metal part before it breaks, and this is one of the URO lifetime warranty parts. This here is the ancillary pulley for this car here. There's nothing much wrong with our pulley, but it is 20 years old, looking a bit rusty, so we'll be replacing that. Unfortunately, they didn't have any of the supercharge tensioners in stock, so we'll come back and do that at another time. One of the other things that we have ordered from them is the accumulator for the SBC brake system. Once again, don't wait for those to fail before you change them. If yours is 20 years old, it's probably a good idea to change it. And the other thing that people who own an R230 may or may not be interested in is the fact that URO now sell all of the hydraulic cylinders and lines for the roof on these cars. And what happens over a period of time is that those cylinders will start to leak as the seals within the cylinders get old, and that'll either manifest itself in a roof not going up and down as quickly as it should, and you may notice a hydraulic fluid leak if you look at the level of the tank. The worst case scenario, you may actually get hydraulic fluid leaking into the headliner, and you'll see the rubber going wavy. But once again, these parts here are not going to get any cheaper as time goes on, and my own philosophy is to have them here before they break. So I'll leave all the part numbers for those cylinders. There's 3 of them on the R230, and similarly the pulleys and water pumps. Now, I would have got a water pump from URO, but at the time I ordered this I didn't realize that I needed a new water pump, so we're going to be fitting an alternative manufacturer. The water pump from URO has got a 2-year unlimited mileage warranty, and bearing in mind that obviously on this car we have the OEM water pump. This car's a very low mileage car, just done over 40,000 miles, and that pump has failed, so an unlimited 2-year warranty from URO is no bad thing. So without further ado, let's see if we can get off the old ancillary belt tensioner and fit the new one, and then we'll set about taking the water pump off. That'll involve draining the coolant out. We'll have to just jack the front of the car up, take off the pan, see if the little plastic coolant plug comes out without breaking, and then we'll have a go at taking off the belt tension and everything else we need to take off to get to that coolant pump. The 2 screws which hold on that tensioner are T45. Whether they come out after 20 years without rounding off or snapping in the engine block is of course another question. Well, that first one seems to be coming out without any problem. Just to complicate matters, when this pulley is not under tension, that hole there is obscured by the pulley. So what we're going to have to do is actually move the pulley out of the way and possibly use an Allen key or something like that to put in that hole to keep the pulley out of the way while we undo the other screw. Well, eventually we got that lower screw out just by holding this with one hand and undoing it with a different wrench on the other hand. This one should be relatively easy. When you buy the pulleys, they have this pin in to actually make life much easier, and once you've installed them, you just pull that pin out with a pair of pliers. and eventually you will be able to pull this out. The new and the one from Euro are identical. Obviously the original one is a little bit rusty, it just has the Mercedes part number on it there, plus the brand, but this one here looks identical. Just remember that when you put the screws back in, you're going to need a dab of thread lock. These obviously have the standard Mercedes blue thread lock on them. We're going to be using the Loctite thread locker normal, which is blue. You don't need to go crazy, it only needs a small amount. It is an awful lot easier putting this on than it is taking it off, but just remember when you're screwing these bolts in, always start putting the bolts in finger tight, so you do not run any risk of crossing the threads. I'll leave the torque specs for these bolts in the description below. I don't have access to them down at the garage. Just need to remember to take out that pin once we've torqued these up. Remember, you're screwing into an aluminium block, so if you don't have the torque specs, do not overdo it. That's job done on that first pulley. We'll leave the pin in until we actually fit the belts. That will make fitting the belts a little bit easier. Next up, we need to drain the coolant out of the car, and in order to do that, we're going to jack the front of the car off, just take off the first front under tray and see if we can find the little plastic drain plug and hope it doesn't snap off in our hands when we're undoing it. We're just going to use the car's jack to put the car up. Rather than putting it on the ground, we'll put it on a piece of wood. That will raise the car slightly higher, so we'll be able to get one of our axle stands through there. It's very important when you're jacking the car up to make sure you've got bricks or chocks under the back and the front wheels on the other side, because this jack will take the car up a certain height and the car can easily roll forward on the jack if you haven't chocked the wheels. Before you start jacking your car up, it's a good idea to turn this here off, otherwise the alarm will go off every time you raise the car on one side. We've got the car safely on axle stands. Now we just need to crawl underneath the car, take off that front tray. 6 of these captive screws holding the under tray on. That's one we haven't replaced. Some of them we have replaced when we did the under tray. There's 2, there's 4 at the front, and then don't forget these 2 here at the back. Once you undo that last screw, this should just wiggle out. Here's the under tray, and you can see the remnants of some of our AC pulley that cracked when we took it off. Now that we've got the under tray off, you can see here is the radiator drain. I do think it's worth getting one of these drain plugs before you start the job, just in case yours does snap off. And even if it doesn't snap off, replacing a brittle plastic part after 20 years is no bad thing. They're only a few pounds from eBay, and I'll leave the Phoebe part number on the screen below. So now we have the moment of truth. We're going to try and undo this. As I say, 9 times out of 10, it will just break when we try and undo it. You can see how brittle that plastic is. This little hose here, if you want to direct the flow of fluid when you're draining it, you would put a little hose here into a bottle or 5-litre jug or whatever it is, and you just, rather than taking this out, which is a mistake many people do, you just have to loosen it, and then you loosen the radiator cap. So let's see if I can undo this using just my fingers. It's highly unlikely, but what happens after 20 years is this gets very brittle, so I'm going to have to put a pair of pliers on there. So wish me luck, I'm going in. Okay, that is actually turning. Remember, don't try and take it all the way out. Okay, I'm just going to loosen that to start off with like that, so we can see there's some fluid coming out of there. Let's see what happens when we undo the radiator cap. Incidentally, it goes without saying that you shouldn't try to drain the coolant when the car is hot. You must leave the car overnight for the coolant to drain down, because that is a pressurized system. Undo that a little bit more. So the coolant is draining, and almost as if a sign from God, the sun is shining directly onto this water pump, which we have to try and take off. Once the coolant has finished draining, we're going to tighten up that little red cap, put the radiator cap on and put the car back down flat, because these hydraulic suspensions, you should not really leave the wheels dangling in the air like that for any great length of time. You never quite know how long one of these jobs is going to take. For the moment, I've just done that up finger tight as hard as I can. If we find out that it leaks, we can also always come back and snug it up more with a set of pliers. This is how much coolant drained out. Now obviously we haven't drained all of the coolant out because there's still some coolant in the engine block, and to get all the coolant out you'd have to have the car running with the heater on. Here is the new water pump, and it's always a million times easier to see how to take something off if you've actually got a new one, because you can see just how many holes there are, or screws there are, holding that on. The first thing I think we'll take off is this bracket here, and then we'll have a go at taking off the supercharger belt tensioner. This top bolt here is an E6. Now these are special sockets, so if you haven't already got yourself one of these socket sets, I'll leave a link to where you can buy one. And this here is an E10. There's nothing special about getting these bolts out, but just remember that there is a bracket behind there, and what we may do is just send these brackets off. Any rusty bits that we'll find, we'll send them off to the powder coaters to get addressed. As you take these bolts out, just make a note of whether or not they have thread lock on them. For example, this lower bolt definitely has blue thread lock on it. Do not lose this bracket for the pipes. I'm just going to take it out and actually attach it to these screws so I don't forget about it. This supercharger tensioner is held on by two screws or bolts, I believe. One is here, nice and easy to get out, and the other one is there. So once again, we're going to have to move this pulley out of the way just by getting a 17mm socket on there and pushing that down out the way. Now you can cancel your gym session tonight, because to get this tensioner out the way to get to that bolt is extremely difficult if you've only got a short stubby spanner. Well, that was tough. Let's hope that this one here will be slightly easier. Okay, that's coming off now. Just got to hold it with the other hand so it doesn't fall off. Okay, hopefully that there is the supercharger pulley. It's a good idea to keep everything together because there are a lot of bolts that come out to get this water pump off. We're going to continue taking these torque screws out here. There's two of them here, and then there's one up here that needs to come out, and then one here. So let's get those out. I will be leaving the torque specs for these screws, but these are not in here very tightly at all. So don't be surprised when you come to torque them up if the torque seems really low. You could also consider replacing these bolts. Once you've cracked these, you should just be able to get them out with your fingers. There are super long bolts there. It's not a bad idea to actually put these bolts in the holes as on the new pump as you take them out of the old pump, just to make absolutely sure you get them in the right place when you put it back together. Next up, we're going to go for this one. And once again, just note that these bolts have thread locker on them. Now this particular bolt here has some black rubbery substance on. I can only hope that's not the first signs of my engine O-rings going, because the M113k engine does have a potential problem where the O-rings separating the water pump from the engine can go, and that's quite an expensive and complicated fix. So far we've taken out 3 of these bolts here. Now these are different lengths. The ones in the middle there are much longer. And next up we're going to take out this one here, which is an E14, I believe, and that is tucked underneath this pulley. I think we can take when we take the water pump off, it'll come with this pulley attached to it. Now this bolt was much tighter than the other, which makes sense because it's a thicker bolt. Okay, let's start loosening these outer bolts here. We're just going to go in a criss-cross pattern, loosening them and hopefully, and then we just got to disconnect the hoses as well, and then we'll see what happens. Well, just as everything was going so well, disaster has struck, and one of these bolts has snapped off here. That is going to be interesting to get that out. And the others are all relatively loose, but this one with no torque at all snapped straight off. There is another bolt just under here. Now these ones here are most likely to snap off. So hopefully, it seems to be okay. Just pop that one in there. And just bear in mind this bolt here by the water pump is longer than the other ones. Next up, this corner bolt. It's another short bolt, and that just goes in there like so. Now this one here goes there, and then this one here. It does occur to me actually that I should probably take the rubber hoses off before I take all the bolts out. This bolt is longer than the others. Just noticed in this hole here, tucked away under the pulley, is a Torx bolt that I've missed. It is so lightly torqued, that bolt's untrue. That goes there. I wonder what the chances are of getting these hose clamps off, or these hoses off, after 20 years. Got that hose clamp off. Once again, it all looks pretty crusty down there. What we're going to attempt to do to get those hoses off is use some ball-ended Allen keys. They rounded there so you won't damage the pipe or score the metal. Try and get that in, maybe hold the end with a pair of pliers, and then get some silicone between the hose and the actual metal bit and see if we can get those off. Don't be tempted to use petroleum-based lubricants like Plus Gas or WD-40 because they will rot the hose away. So let's see how that goes. We just about got this one. Oops, got that one off. There we go. That wasn't too bad. There's still going to be some coolant in there, which is going to leak out, unfortunately. That bolt there goes there. I think we've just got one more on this side to get out, and that pump should come off. That goes in there. So the advantage of putting the bolts in the holes is I can see exactly where I've missed one. I can see that I've missed one of these torque bolts just down there by the pipe. These bolts are in so loosely. That goes just through there. I can see I've missed one more bolt here as well, and that goes in that hole there. This is a longer bolt, goes in there. Now, in theory, this should just come off. There'll probably be a big gush of water. Oh my lordy, there we go. Let's have a look at that. So that's what the inside of that looks like. We're going to have to obviously clear those surfaces up, take out that rubber gasket, and see if we can get this snapped off bolt here. Now obviously this pump has been leaking for a while, and that's probably why that has corroded in there like that. Now you can see how much crud there is around here that we're going to have to clean up. And what is really important is that you do not get any of that either down those open pipe holdings there. So we're going to just block those off with some rubber gloves, or indeed in these channels here. So we're just going to block that channel off as well, because we're going to need to clean all of this off before we fit the new pump. I'll tell you what's really strange is that there is no gasket on this other than the rubber gasket. There's the small rubber gasket here, which you can pull this here, and that should come out in one go. I'm not going to take that out just yet because I'm going to clean everything first, but I would have expected to have seen another gasket around the edge because the new pumps come with that gasket. You can see that as this bearing starts to go, this metal pump here is rubbing on here, and eventually that will start gouging a hole in there, and all those little metal shavings will end up in your engine. So if you do have a loose bearing here, it is a good idea to sort it out before it becomes a catastrophic problem. This pulley here, you can see it screws into the pump, and usually what you have to do is tap these threads in there, because of course the normal R230s don't have the supercharger. To get this plastic cap off, you can just get a watchmaker screwdriver, and then we're just going to have to screw this out. Use an impact wrench. I'm hoping that this is not a reverse thread. Well, we got there in the end. That is not a reverse thread. It was just in there, good and tight. I'm going to leave this video here. In the next video, I'm going to be attempting to get that snapped bolt out of the head or out of the engine there, maybe using a magnetic induction torch. Maybe it'll come out with a set of mole grips, who knows. We'll be fitting the new water pump, putting all the belts on, testing everything, and hopefully, fingers crossed, getting this car back on the road.